Welcome to Hello Baltimore County. I'm Ellen Kobler. With the tragic situation in Flint, Michigan, lead paint poisoning is in the national headlines every day. It's not just leaching water pipes that have been a concern across the country. We have brought back our local experts to tell us more. David Fielder from Lead Safe Baltimore County and David Skinner of the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Tell us about the problems with lead paint and how many children are diagnosed with lead paint poisoning in the United States.
Well, in the United States, the statistic is that there are roughly 535,000 children under the age of 6 that have been identified with lead levels of 5 micrograms per deciliter or above.
And that's a bad level, right?
That's a bad level because the CDC recently lowered that level in 2012 from 10 micrograms per deciliter to 5 micrograms per deciliter. But the research has been showing for decades that levels as low as 2 to 7 are responsible for any of the adverse symptoms that you see associated with lead poisoning.
And about how many, so 500,000 children that are currently known, how many homes in the U.S. still have lead paint on the premises that poses a threat?
Roughly 24 million.
And how many children in Baltimore County have been diagnosed?
The 2014 MDE blood lead surveillance report indicates that there were 188 children identified with levels of 5 to 9 micrograms per deciliter, and then there were children at levels of 10 micrograms and above. There were 22 children. But what you have to keep in mind that the average is there's only about 20% of the kids who need to be tested that are being tested.
Only 20% who need to be tested
Right.
are being tested.
Right.
Oh my goodness. And David, tell us about the adverse effects that a child can experience after they get lead into their system.
Well, the lead paint and the lead poisoning is a neurotoxin and affects kids' cognitive abilities. It can give them high blood pressure. It can affect their motor skills. So it's a really bad thing to have happen to children.
And what exactly does the Baltimore County Department of Planning do to help families whose houses have lead?
The Office of Planning has a program, the Lead Safe Baltimore County program, and eligible families can come to us and receive education about what to do with their homes. We can provide contractors at no cost to take care of the lead poisoning issues. And there are, after the house has been addressed for the lead poisoning, we provide education afterwards as well, so they know what to look out for if anything should arise after the work is done.
You mentioned eligibility. It's an income eligibility. How does that work?
It is income eligible. There are some other documentation one would need to provide to get into the program. But to start off with, there are family size and income levels associated with those family sizes that you would need to fall into to be eligible for the program.
And do you have to be a homeowner or can you rent?
It can be either.
Really?
That's right, that's right. For homeowners, there are different criteria. You need to have some homeowner insurance. You need to have ownership of the property, not just live there, and some other various documentation that proves that you are that homeowner. And for a renter, there are more issues with the landlord and getting documentation from the landlord of that property.
Now, explain a little bit about how the paint gets into the child's system, just physically.
So what they have found historically is that young children, who it affects most because they're still developing developing throughout their childhood, but up to age 6, the most development is going on. So kids are getting microscopic levels of lead dust on their skin, and it's a lot of hand-to-mouth activity for kids that age.
The kids pick up things and stick
Pick
them in
things
their
up,
mouth,
put them in
including
their
a
mouth,
little
absolutely.
chip of paint.
Right, right. So that is the common way how kids are being lead poisoned. And the lead dust is coming from, let's say you have older windows in your house that you open and close all the time. There are fine amounts of dust that come off of that window every time you open and close it, or a door that might be an older door. When you're opening and closing, fine amounts of this particle are ending up on the floor in front of the doors and windows, and that's where children are playing and coming in contact with.
Now, is it just the paint inside the home or also the exterior?
Could be exterior. There could be deteriorated paint on the exterior of the house that might be tracked in on someone's shoes coming in and out of the property. It's a very sticky particle, as it's referred to, which means that it can be picked up on things like shoes and be tracked into a house and tracked throughout the house.
Okay, and David, this is not just a problem in particularly low-income areas, right? It has
Not
to
at
do
all.
with when the house was built and painted.
That's right.
And painted throughout its time.
That's right. Anywhere in the United States, you have homes that were built before 1978, and that just was the industry standard.
1978, so
right.
that's a lot of houses out there.
Right, and the reason why that year is significant is because it wasn't until 1978 that Congress actually authorized the Consumer Product Safety Commission to ban the sale of lead paint to consumers for residential use. And then you keep in mind that was after a 7-year phase-out period because the legislation was actually passed in 1971.
And in Baltimore County particularly, there is a lot of housing stock, mostly inside the Beltway, that falls into that 1978 category. So we really view it as a metro Baltimore issue with the city and the county.
Okay, now what about adults? Do adults also ingest lead paint?
Not so much ingest lead paint, but where they work, they may come in contact with lead paint. Say a contractor who is maybe demolishing a wall or something in a house. That lead dust can get on their clothing, and they bring that clothing home.
They can inhale it. They just
They
simply
can inhale it, right.
And then it goes from your lungs into your blood.
That's right.
Well-
We have situations where maybe a parent is working for a contractor and comes home and they're not so much affected, but that their child is then coming into contact with their clothing or work shoes, and they are becoming lead poisoned through that.
Goodness. Now, considering what's going on in Flint, Michigan, and that was a different situation with the water pipes, but can you talk a little bit about the social costs of childhood lead poisoning?
Sure. Research has shown that it's costing children over their lifetime into adults roughly around $723,000. That's how much they'll lose out because of the adverse impacts associated with lead poisoning.
Because it affects their brain.
It affects
and
their brain. That's
they're
right.
not
Lead is a
as
neurotoxin. It gets
Yeah.
into the areas of the brain that control cognition and how people learn. So it basically diminishes their capacity for learning. It diminishes their capacity for earning an income.
And so taxpayers are obviously funding these programs to help low-income people. What sort of return do they get for that investment?
Well, it shows that for every dollar that you put into lead poisoning prevention, you roughly get a return of anywhere from $183 to about $200.
Interesting. All right, so are all children in Maryland now being screened for lead poisoning, David?
We expect to see, coming from the state, that all children statewide will be tested at ages 1 and 2. Currently, that is not the situation. in
Through
state
their
of-
doctor's office?
Through the pediatrician's office, yes.
Okay, so it would be some sort of a state law that the doctors have to do the testing?
Correct, yes.
Well, there are some protocols in place, like, for example, kids who are enrolled in Head Starts. Head Start makes it mandatory that they have that lead test for enrollment, not just for admittance, but for actually to attend their classes. And then there are protocols in place right now where children do get tested at certain wellness visits. But what the state wants to do is make that testing relevant to the lower CDC levels, elevated blood lead level of 5 micrograms per deciliter, as opposed to 10, where it is right now.
Okay, and this is just so important for people that might just be tuning in. Can you just give a little recap about the dangers of lead paint and what people need to do?
So there's no amount of lead paint, lead poisoning that is acceptable for kids. They're going to be affected at any level. But at the higher ranges of 5 milligrams and higher.
What is 5 milligrams? Is that in the blood, or how much
in the blood. It's a measurement of lead in blood.
Okay.
It's a scientific way
Right.
that they measure.
Right, 5 milligrams per deciliter of lead in blood.
Okay, and how much of the lead paint do they have to take in to have damage?
Very small amount. When we go to these trainings, they'll pull out a packet of sugar and spread out a few granules of sugar, and that would be enough
Oh my
to
goodness.
poison a child.
Right.
Yeah, an acute poisoning.
They say
Okay.
roughly around 3 granules specifically can
so
poison
what-
a child and cause them to actually develop those lead levels.
And so what should people do to protect their children, and what does the county do to help?
Well, number one, you need to get your home tested. If you're living in a pre-1978 home that has never been through a total gut rehab, so if you still have those original surfaces with that original lead paint, although it may be covered with decades of non-leaded paint, if those surfaces are still subject to wear and tear, deterioration, cracking, chipping, flaking, peeling, that home needs to be tested. Then you need to get your child tested. If that child is under the age of 6, you need to find out what their exposure might be, if any, and if they have developed any lead levels.
And anyone can have their child tested.
Okay.
And we expect it to be a state law, but anyone can choose to take their child to the
Right.
pediatrician.
And most importantly, it's not an income issue at all when you think about testing your child, because there are plenty of upper income families that live in pre-1978 homes who, they watch these DIY shows and they, kick out windows and doors. They're excited, and sometimes the kids are doing it with them. And so what we're really finding is that some of these families are experiencing that their children are having been exposed to lead and having high lead levels.
All right. Well, thank you once again for bringing attention to this critical
Thank you.
issue.
Thank you for having us again.
Sure. And thank you for watching Hello Baltimore County. Don't forget, you can find out about what's going on right on the county website and by connecting with Baltimore County government on Facebook and Twitter. We'll see you next time.